Listen, you're probably spending way too much time in the overhyped areas of preparedness and way too little time in the unappreciated areas. That's not good. Your time and energy are limited resources, so using them wisely is critical to making meaningful progress. That's why today I'm going to share the 5 most overhyped prepping topics and the 9 serially underappreciated ones. And I truly believe that after you hear all 14 of these, I'll change your mind on what's important and what's not. Hey, I'm Jack. I'm a co-founder of SkilledSurvival.com and TheResilientLife.com. And I've been sharing my thoughts, ideas, strategies, gear reviews, and everything survival online since 2013. And now I'm growing my YouTube channel. So if you enjoy these types of videos and you want to learn more, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification. That way you'll never miss a future video. Okay, let's jump right into the first overhyped prepping topic. Number 1, wasting time trying to predict the next disaster. To me, this is one of the biggest wastes of time out there. As humans, we have a terrible track record of predicting anything. Sure, we can predict a few more minor things like tomorrow's weather or your dinner plans, but not bigger, broader societal level predictions. I'm talking about significant events related to financial markets or future disasters. The more complex, the more difficult it is to predict, and the bigger waste of time they tend to be. Here's an example of this from Howard Marks's recent investing memo. He's an investor who gives valuable knowledge about the markets and prediction and value investing, and I read it each quarter or so. I found a snippet in here about prediction and how far off we are. Quote, in December of 2019, the median forecast on Wall Street held that the S&P 500 would rise 2.7% in 2020. What was the actual return? 18.4%. It was too low by 16 percentage points. Worse yet, in April of 2020, after the pandemic had taken hold and after Congress and the Fed had taken action, the consensus forecast return was revised downward to a negative 11%. That's nearly 30 percentage points below the eventual outcome. End quote. So these professional forecasters are pretty much worthless. We can't predict the future when it comes to markets and disasters. So instead of trying to predict the exact next disaster, focus on being more resilient. Spend time becoming less fragile to all future disasters. You don't need to predict a future disaster. Just assume that there will be future turmoil and then focus on taking action to be ready for it. Here's a quote from one of my favorite books on understanding risks in our lives, Anti-Fragile. Quote, you can't predict in general, but you can predict that those who rely on predictions are taking more risks, will have some trouble, and perhaps even go bust. Why? Someone who predicts will be fragile to prediction errors. End quote. I think this is saying that those who spend time predicting and believe they can figure out before everyone else what's happening are just fooling themselves. They're fragile because they assume their prediction powers will help them see the future, giving them time to move out of the way before disaster strikes. But they're relying on their false sense of prediction accuracy to protect themselves. Instead, they should be investing their time and energy to become resilient to any and all future mishaps. Okay, one more quote from The Black Swan. It's a book by the same author, and it sums things up pretty simply by saying, invest in preparedness, not prediction, end quote. Okay, number 2 overhyped topic, mastering wilderness survival skills. Okay, now, before you start getting upset with me, let me just say there is some value in learning bushcraft skills. It's just not as much as a lot of people think. Let me ask you a few questions. What are the odds of you spending a night in a debris shelter? Extremely low. You need to be stranded in the woods without a vehicle, without a backpack, and be more than a day's hike from any town or village before it makes sense. And that's just not likely going to happen. Or what about starting a fire with sticks? Nearly zero if you keep a lighter or ferro rod with you at all times. And how about making your own bow and arrow from scratch? Perhaps this skill comes in handy in a worst-case mass human extinction situation, but if that happens, you'll find both by scavenging sporting goods stores or abandoned homes. Now, compare those bushcraft skills that you'll never likely use to the following. What are the odds of having to live without electricity for a week? Well, this happens to millions of people throughout the world all the time. What about a deadly pandemic worse than COVID-19, where you don't want to go into a grocery store without a gas mask? Seems much more possible nowadays, right? Or how about a wildfire tearing through your neighborhood? Again, it happens every year, and it's getting worse. That's why you should have a bug out plan. So unless you become unlucky and end up stranded on an island, most bushcraft skills are just a fun hobby at best. They're mostly just for entertainment purposes. So focus more of your limited time, energy, and resources where you'll get the most bang for your buck. Abilities and resources that will significantly improve your overall resiliency to the most likely emergencies. Okay, overhyped topic number 3. Buying all the latest survival gadgets. I do enjoy checking out the latest survival gear and gadgets that come on the market nowadays. It's cool to analyze them and even test them out from time to time. The latest tactical watches are chock full of technology, but they have a high price tag to match. But again, these fancy new gadgets are not likely to be the gear you need most in emergency situations. The most important survival gear has already been invented. And while they seem boring, they just work. For example, freeze-dried foods. That's a technology. Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers, water storage containers and rainwater collection systems, water filtration devices, rocket stoves, tacked bivvies, bug-out bags, gas masks, etc. These are older but proven technologies that are much more important than the coolest survival gadgets you see coming on the market today. Overhyped topic number 4. Paying attention to overly fear-based survival products. I hate hyper fear-based marketing. Perhaps you know what I'm talking about. It's those 30-minute video sales pitches that tell you a doomsday story. Often these stories are about a third world country or the coming apocalypse, predictions that are being proven by revelations from the Bible, and end times are just days away. The reason marketers do this is because it works. But it's not accurate. It's a fear-based story to get you to buy their product in order to reduce the discomfort that they created. In my opinion, it's not ethical. It's pure manipulation. It works because it preys on humans' attention filter. You see, we don't have the capacity to consume even a fraction of all the potential information that's out there coming at us. So we use a simple filter to ignore the mundane and the boring stuff, and only allow the most dramatic and interesting stuff to get through. That's why most media stories are negative in nature. They focus on storms and shootings and diseases and floods and building collapses and plane crashes, etc. The more dramatic the news, the more we listen and give attention to it. It's hardwired into our brains for evolutionary reasons. Because those who paid attention to a wild animal attack survived, and those who didn't, well, they didn't survive. And the media and the marketers know fear is the easiest way to grab your attention and to keep your attention. Fear is used in the name of profits. Instead, I like to use reason and logic to talk to you with respect. I want to see everyone work towards becoming more resilient over time. Sure, some urgency is called for. You never know when the next big collapse or disaster will be. And a bit of urgency can help create a healthy amount of motivation. But I think you should make sure the product being pitched to you has real value first. They should be willing to earn your trust before you buy. If everything you hear from them is super scary and fear-based, and their $37.95 digital product is the only solution to this problem, and everyone who doesn't buy will perish tomorrow, well, then shut it off immediately and look for a product that has more respect for you. Overhyped prepping topic number 5. Continuous news cycle consumption. This one is somewhat related to the previous overhypes. What is the objective truth nowadays? I don't know. Who the hell knows? Seriously, it seems like truth is a mist of yesteryears, or maybe the past truth was only an illusion held firm by a select number of media outlets. But It's seemingly harder to get to the heart of any issue without a political spin or hidden agenda tied to it. And the news media makes money off you paying attention. They put those flashing red scrolling emergency banners at the top and the bottom of your screens because they help increase the amount of time you watch. The more people who watch, the longer they watch, the more they can charge advertisers during commercial breaks. Most news outlets, cable, radio, newspapers, etc., they use controversy and fear to get you hooked. For example, when listener numbers on hardcore political talk radio shows start to soften, the producers prod the on-air hosts to stir the pot, to create some real anger, to get their listeners hot and bothered. And if you consider yourself to be tuned in and in the know, you're probably paying a big price to be informed. You're paying for this informed status with the cost of your internal peace and happiness. You're handing over your calm for what? Restless nights, arguments with family and neighbors, mistrust of anyone who has a different political stance? I think it's a terrible trade-off because I believe statistics and narratives can be spun in any way the media desires. So what you hear is what you want to hear. Instead of having a productive discussion about the best way to live together as a society, nowadays it's all about hate and blame assignment and finger pointing. It's just not helpful. Instead, I try to primarily focus all of my time and energy on things I can control. And for the most part, the 24-hour news cycle has very little impact on my own life and my own resiliency. And it's got an insanely high noise to signal ratio. You see, most news you consume daily is noise. Very little of it is important, a few months or even a year later, so it has very little signal. It's mostly just junk or noise. The more information you consume daily, the more noise that gets in. And if something is truly a signal, don't worry. You'll hear about it in other ways. Your neighbors will mention it, or an email will include a reference to it. So here's what the book Anti-Fragile has to say about the signal to noise problem. Quote, thanks to the constant news cycles, we are living more and more in virtual reality, separated from the real world, a little bit more every day while realizing it less and less. Consider that every day, about 6,200 persons die in the United States, many of preventable causes. But the media only reports the most anecdotal and sensational cases, hurricanes, freak incidents, small plane crashes, giving us a more and more distorted map of real risks. In an ancestral environment, the anecdote, the interesting, is information, no longer today. Likewise, by presenting us with explanations and theories, the media induces an illusion of understanding of the world. End quote. Well said. Let's move on to the underappreciated survival and preparedness topics. These are the things you should be paying more attention to, but you're probably not. Number 6, measuring how resilient you are or not. I want to start with a couple more quotes from Anti-Fragile. Again, it's one of my favorite books. Quote, it is far easier to figure out if something is fragile than to predict the occurrence of an event that may harm it. And a second quote, not seeing a tsunami or an economic event coming is excusable. Building something fragile to them is not. End quote. So stop spending so much of your time consuming news and trying to predict the next disaster. Instead, reallocate that same time and energy into activities and self-improvement that have a real impact when a future disaster arrives. Just go ahead and assume the future holds several major disasters in your lifetime. Then do something about it. Go from being what I call a part of the fragile masses into the resilient few. That's what my website community, The Resilient Life, is all about. We challenge you to take care of the preparedness basics. And then once those are covered, we give you the motivation to keep going, to become as resilient to the unknown future as you're comfortable with. If you're interested in learning more about the resilient life, there's a link in the description below. Number 7, don't ignore the prepping basics. Prepping basics may seem boring to some. 2 weeks of food, 2 weeks of water, medical supplies. But the problem is those basics are the building blocks to becoming resilient. If only everyone in the world had the prepping basics in place, we as a human species would be much more resilient to any and all future tragedies, global or local. But unfortunately, it's more fun to focus on interesting topics. So if you're watching this right now and you don't have your prepping basics in place, or you're wondering what are the prepping basics I'm talking about, then go to the link in the description below to find out more. Number 8, honing your situational awareness. Here's the deal. Some folks have good sense of situational awareness, while others don't. I don't know if some folks are just blessed by their DNA and brain makeup, or perhaps it's the way their parents raised them. It's probably some combination of both. But man, if you don't have good situational awareness, then you're in real trouble when things get chaotic. It's hard to think straight when you're in the grip of fear. And situational awareness is not just during times of chaos, it's any time you're in new or public spaces. When I go somewhere new, I take stock of the situation, like the layout of the place, before I relax and enjoy myself. I want to have a good sense of where the exits are in case of a fire or a mass shooting. I want to take stock of the folks whom I'm with and keep an eye out for anyone who doesn't quite belong. Heck, since I have little kids, when I go to the grocery store, I strategically park in a location where they don't even have to walk behind any cars or cross any streets. Sure, it's further distance to walk, but it removes the risks of my kids getting run over on accident. You should learn how to stop and think about the world around you more, to work on improving your own sense of situational awareness. That way, you can reduce many of the unnecessary risks in your life. Underappreciated prepper topic. We're on the 9th on this list. Plenty of water filtration. Quote, "When the well is dry, we know the worth of water," by Benjamin Franklin. This is so true. That's why you should have a stockpile of water today. But if you have some water, but it becomes contaminated or compromised, well, if you're ever forced to drink contaminated water, you're putting yourself at extreme risk, especially during an emergency. Water filtration is one of those boring, forgotten about topics in preparedness. It's been covered over and over. It's one of those, yeah, I get it topics. And that's fine if you've got your water filtration plan in place. If you have a Life Straw or a few Sawyer Minis, an Alexa Pure or a big Berkey filter, great. Just make sure you have plenty of water filtration at your disposal now. If not, please heed this warning and make this happen today. I'll put some links of articles and products in the description below, but don't wait. Other prepping topics can wait a few days, but not water filtration. It's that important. Number 10, not having a Plan B extreme weather strategy. Now, this one is somewhat related to water. Most of the time, having an abundant supply of clean water is the number one survival priority. However, occasionally this priority can get trumped by extreme weather conditions. In general, you can survive about 3 days without water, but you can perish in about 3 hours or less due to severe heat exhaustion or hypothermia. So what's your plan should the power go out and you're forced to live in below zero freezing conditions for a week? Or perhaps it's the opposite. What about 120-degree weather with no AC? You need to have a plan for these potential extremes to protect yourself and your family. Now, maybe you have a wood stove in your home and a nice pile of firewood. Perfect. You're good to go. Or maybe you have a whole house backup generator and a bunch of gasoline to keep it running in the middle of summer. Great. But what if these options are outside the range of what you can afford? Well, then I recommend you get a tacked bivvy for the cold, link in the description below, or you could also check out building a makeshift heater with small candles and some clay pots. And for the summer heat, basements are the easiest way to beat the heat, if you have one. Otherwise, shade, a bit of a breeze, and a spray bottle with water are the next best options. Extreme temps are dangerous, so please figure out your backup plans now before you're cooking or freezing to death. Number 11, not having a gas mask and filters. Okay, we went from 3 days with dehydration to 3 hours with hypothermia, and now we're going down to 3 minutes. If you can't breathe, You can survive for about 3 minutes before you pass out. And then, over the next 10 minutes or so, your body and brain will go into permanent shutdown mode. Smoke from a fire can significantly impair your ability to breathe. So, in such an emergency, a gas mask can be a literal lifesaver. But it has so many more uses than just for traditional smoke. It can prevent you from breathing in potentially deadly toxins or pathogens. I'm talking nuclear fallout, chemical agents, nerve gases, tear gas, debris dust, and deadly viruses. In a worst case scenario, anyone who's breathing in deadly air without protection could be part of the real Walking Dead. Those folks whose time on Earth is severely limited, but they don't know it yet. The bottom line is, gas masks are a critical part of a basic preparedness plan. Unfortunately, many folks feel they are too overly advanced or too doomsday-like to own. But that's just plain wrong. They are a critical personal protection equipment, PPE, and should be a part of your preps. It's something you get early in your preparedness journey. Links to gas mask articles and our recommended gear are in the description below. Number 12, physical fitness. The hard truth is, being overweight or living with a chronic illness is a major survival disadvantage. Now, for many folks, there's not a lot of choice in the matter. Sometimes the hand of cards you're dealt is not ideal, and you'll just have to make do with the best you can. But for everyone else, you shouldn't ignore your physical fitness. You want to be strong and healthy with plenty of endurance should a widespread disaster hit. You want to be the one helping your family and not becoming a burden to them. At the very least, be someone who pulls your own weight from both a physical standpoint as well as a mental one. Fitness can help with both of those goals. Number 13, personal/local emergencies. What's more likely in the next 10 years? A worldwide EMP disaster, a supervolcano explosion, a nuclear holocaust, or you get in a car wreck, you lose your job, you deal with a flood or a tornado, an earthquake, a hurricane, etc. Yep, it's the local personal emergencies that are way more likely to occur in a given year. But again, planning for those events is not as interesting and not as entertaining as trying to guess the cause of the end of the world as we know it. But that's a mistake. You should focus on becoming more resilient for everyday emergencies first and foremost. Spend time where the likely payoff is best. Number 14, real simulated practices. You'll never know if your survival and preparedness plans have holes in them unless you practice. We had a Resilient Life member who simulated a week-long power outage. They reported several things that they were mistaken about. For example, they were surprised at how much water they actually went through. And they way underestimated their water needs because they weren't thinking about the cleanup and the cooking and their pets. They also discovered the value of having lots of non-electric entertainment options, such as board games and puzzles and good books. I've also heard a lot of stories from folks who saw a perfect bug-out route on a map, only to discover that the route was impassable once they actually tried it. The bottom line is, if you haven't practiced, then you're not prepared. If you're still watching this video, then you obviously enjoy this type of information. And the good news is, I've got lots more coming your way. So subscribe right now, that way you won't miss any new videos I do in the coming days. So until next time, prepare, adapt, and overcome.